Hi everyone, trust you all are doing well. So in this one we're going to be building a Livewire contact form, so all these fields, and do some validation and all that kind of stuff. So this form is available to other clone, so I've created the repository for that. So in this one, so you can just go to our page. I will leave a link in the description, okay, so that you can actually just go to Livewire contact right there, and then you can basically, as you can see, is for the beginner course on YouTube, and you can obviously either clone the repository or you can just download a zip file right there. Okay, so that you can be just basically start from where I am. You can obviously build your own little form, so whatever project you're busy with or whatever application you might have, you can build your own contact form. You can also do that. This is just for somebody that just want to start off where I'm at. Okay, so let's get started. All right, so obviously what I've done is I created an environment file. So obviously you need to have a database. All right, so just make sure you add your database and you migrate the database as well. All right, so that's it. So there's nothing special. So the next thing that we're going to do, so once you clone and all that kind of stuff and just migrate your database, just make sure you have one. And let's quickly, let me just make this a little bit bigger for you guys. All right, so the next thing that we're going to do is we need to create our Livewire component. All right, so but before we do that, I just want to show you the routes. The route that I created, I just created a controller called page controller that will go to the index view, index method inside the controller. So let me just show you the index method inside there, and we're just returning the pages, this view right here. So the view that we've seen in the browser is basically this one right here. So we're going to build this contact form. Right, so obviously I've done a Jetstream installation. That's why I used the Jetstream label and the inputs, and obviously the arrows for that as well. So you can obviously add additional fields in here if you want to. So this one is for the name. You can add one for the first name, last name, all that kind of stuff. But this is basically the one that we're going to use for now. Right, and then the page controller obviously returns that. Okay, so on the index field right here, obviously this whole form field right there, this part right here, I want that to be actually a Livewire component. So let's quickly create our Livewire component. So open up your terminal. All right, so I've got terminal open. So let's quickly create it. So PHP artisan Livewire, and this one I'm just going to call it contact form. Just like that. All right, so then we create basically a view, a class, and a view. So we got our component right there, and we got the view right there. So let's quickly go there. So under app HTTP Livewire, you will see we got a new one right here. So now we got our contact form. Okay. All right, so now we need to create public properties for our form right here. So if we go back to the browser right here, you will see we got a name, address, and obviously a message right here. Okay, so that's the three public properties we want to create in order for us to sync this input with that public property. So let's quickly do that. Right, now the thing with this is we need to create those public properties. So let's quickly create them. So the first one is going to be public for the name, public for the email. If you guys remember, if you followed along with the series, we have discussed this in a little bit more detail. And next one, we're going to just call this message like this. Right, so now we created our public properties right here. So in our form right here, what we're going to do, so let me just, you see the form fields, we've got a name, we've got an email, and now the other one, this one, I'm just going to call this one for message. And the name right here is going to be message as well. All right, so just make sure you put the input label. Another thing is, how do we link, if you guys remember, I want to make this form field basically our Livewire component. So we got our view right here, but instead of the div right here, I want that to actually be our Livewire component. Right, so let's just quickly copy the whole form right there, and actually just do a Livewire, and we just put the contact form like this. Right. So now the thing is, now we've got the Livewire component to actually be our contact form. But if you see this, if we do this, all right, let's quickly go to the browser. You can see in work, do what you enjoy. So basically now that part of that component is showing, but we want the form to be there. So let's do that quickly. All right, so between our div tags, we add the form field right there. So let's quickly see if the form gets displayed. Right, so now we see the form, so everything is all good. Right, so let's go back to our code editor and actually make this form functional with Livewire. Right, so now the thing is, if you guys remember, in order to sync a property, so an input field with a public property right here, in order to actually bind them together, I'm going to use the term bind, but bind basically means syncing it together. In order to do that, we use the directive wire and model, okay, and we're going to assign this one to be the name. All right, the next one is this one right here. We're going to use the wire model again. So if you have more fields, okay, so you can use this as well. You just add obviously the relevant public property. So if you have another one for last name, so let me just do like this. If you add another field called last name, you basically do the same thing. Right, so this can be for unlimited amount of fields. Right, so input field for wire model, we just want to bind that to be actually the email. Right, and obviously our text area right here, we want to also do the same thing. So let's do a wire model. So we bind that to basically our message right there. So let me just give me some room like this. All right, so now at the moment, if I fill in anything right here, let me just actually output the name on top here, just like this. So whatever I type needs to be displayed right there. And so let's see if it's binded. As you can see, it's displaying right there on top, right there as I type, so we know that it is binded to that property. Okay, let me cancel that. Now, the thing with Livewire is when we create a form, we actually don't want to let the form do its normal default behavior, which meaning if I press this button, it will actually submit the form. I don't want the form to be submitted and do a request. I actually want the form to be handled by Livewire. In order to do that, we don't have an action right here. Okay, so we delete the action. Now the thing is, what we're doing in Livewire is we're doing a wire. All right, and then just do that. Then we add submit. Now in order to submit the form, we actually add the .prevent. Okay, so what we want to do is we want the form to prevent it from submitting and basically stop the default behavior. Now the thing is, when we actually press the send button, now the wire submit right there, we're calling on a method right here. What do we want the form to do? Which method is basically going to handle the form? Now in this case, we're going to call a method inside our Livewire component called form submit. Right? You can call it submit, whatever the case would be, whatever you want it to, what makes sense for you. But in my case, I'm going to call it something that if someone reads it, they can understand it. Form submit. All right? I can call it form submit method to be more specific, but I'm just going to call it form submit. All right? So obviously, haven't created this method inside my component yet, but in order to submit this form, we use a wire submit.prevent, and we do a form submit like that. Right, so now let's quickly create that method. So public function, we're going to create that method form submit like this. All right, now I'm just going to do a die and dump form submit. Right, now the thing is, as soon as I press this send button, all right, because we got that button right there and the type is submit. All right, so as soon as I send this button, it's basically going to submit this form, but to our method inside our component right here. All right, so let's do that. All right, so if I press the send button, that form needs to be sent. All right, so let's see. All right, as you can see, if I make it a little bit bigger for you guys, as you can see, we got that form submitted right there. Cool, very, very, very nice. Now the thing is, I don't want this form to be submitted if the fields are empty. Now the thing with Livewire is we can actually do real-time validation on our forms. Now let's quickly go and do that. Now the thing is, you would remember if you have work on your controllers, because I'm actually speaking to the crowd that works with PHP. We would have had a request like this and a request like this. We would have normally had this in our controllers, and then we did this dot validate, then we add the request like this, and then we obviously added what fields needs to be validated like this. All right, so that's basically what we have done in our controllers. But in Livewire, we do the validation a little bit differently. Now, in order to validate in Livewire, what we do is we create a public property, protected actually, protected rules like this. All right, so in this case we can actually add the rules right here. Now the thing is, you can add them as many rules for the certain things, just how you used to do the validation. So in this case we can just add the name, and we can add the fields like this. Then you can add to say the name is required. Why did I put the question mark there? All right, you can add the rules. In this case we will add required right here, just to see if the validation works. Let's press the submit button and see if the rule actually come into effect. Right, so let's press the send button. Oh boy, the form was sent again. But now you might ask, all right, but we did do the rules, but there's another thing that we need to do as well. So let's go back. Okay, the other part that we need to do in our form is actually, before we do that, we need to do this part right here, this dot validate. That's the only thing that we do. All right, so we put our rules in here, and in our form submit, instead of actually adding all the rules right there, we actually just do this dot validate like that. Okay, so we got our protected rules right there. Now let's see if we actually get any errors. Right, so let's quickly press the send button. And as you can see, we get a validation to say the name field is required. Right, so let's add all other rules for these ones as well. Right, so the other one is the email. Okay, so we can add the email. So basically we can add a field of required. And we can add actually additional ones where you can say like, make sure it's an email or whatever the case may be. You can add all those additional parameters that you used to do with your controllers when you do your validation. And the other ones is, let's just do, this one is going to be the message. And I'm just going to make this one to be required as well. I just want to do a max. Okay. So this one is going to be a max of 250. Now let's make it 10 characters, just as a test. All right, so let's see if all the validation work. Right, so the other thing that I want to do as well, just make sure you input error. This needs to be the same as your name right there. So the name right here needs to be a message. Right, so otherwise this one will not display, as you can see, for the email and the name. So let's go and test it. We just want to make sure it's a max characters, let's say of 5. I don't want to type too much. Okay, so just to kind of display the validation. All right, so let's go and check. All right, so if I press send without actually entering anything, let's see. Right, you can see the name, the message, the email field is required. Nice. All right, so let me just put in the name. and this one email@email.com, and let's add something a little bit longer than what is required. So let's just press send. As you can see, the message must not be greater than 5 characters. Okay, so our validation work, everything is quite fun, and it all comes from Livewire itself. Right, so that brings us to an end of this lesson. So what we're going to do in the next one is we're going to process this form right here. So in this part was just to get the form all set up and do the validation. So in the next one, we're going to actually process the form. Right, thank you guys for watching. If you like the video, please give it a like. If you don't, please give it a dislike. Positive, negative, constructive feedback I always appreciate. And consider subscribing to the channel for more on Laravel, Livewire, and maybe PHP or Python or JavaScript in the future. All right, thank you guys, and see you in the next one. Adios.